The river doesn't speak, but it remembers. Somewhere deep in the fertile chaos of the Ganges Delta, beyond the monsoon-slick fields and the ruined palaces, a secret has been carried quietly for centuries. Not in books or stone carvings, but in blood. The Bengali people, nearly 250 million souls between Bangladesh and India's eastern flank, have lived at the mouth of history. Traders came here with silk and salt. Conquerors came with fire and flags. And when the world forgot them, the land remained, quietly weaving the stories of its people into the smallest threads of biology. What makes a people unique? Culture? Language? Borders? No, not really. Uniqueness is buried in the double helix, curled like memory inside DNA. And the genome of the Bengali population holds something most South Asians do not: the unmistakable echo of another world. It starts subtly, in global genetic studies, maps that plot our ancestry not by where we live, but by who we once were. Bengalis refuse to fall neatly into place. Their DNA clusters with other South Asians, yes, but just slightly off-center. A whisper of the East lingers in their genetic profile, a silent fingerprint from another time, another direction. And it's not a mistake. It's not contamination. It's not theory. It's evidence. This evidence tells us that the Bengali people aren't just a branch of Indo-Aryan expansion or South Asian antiquity. They are, in a very real sense, a bridge, a living record of thousands of years of contact between civilizations that were never meant to meet. How did this happen? Why here? To answer that, we must leave behind maps and flags and travel instead along ancient trade routes, forgotten migration corridors, and across the floodplains that once connected forests of Burma to the bazaars of Bengal. Because the truth is, DNA doesn't lie. And in the Bengali genome, we find markers, traces, of East Asian and Southeast Asian ancestries that simply do not exist in the rest of India. One study reveals that roughly 10% of the average Bengali's genome comes from East or Southeast Asia, a fact both startling and illuminating. The number is small enough to miss in casual observation, yet large enough to matter. Because that 10% is like a red thread in a tapestry. It changes the whole pattern. And it gets stranger. That East Asian ancestry is not random. It is consistent, statistically significant, and remarkably traceable. Geneticists can date the moment it entered the Bengali genome, around the 6th century CE. A time of political collapse, environmental change, and silent migration. When the Gupta Empire was crumbling, when Buddhism and Brahmanism clashed in the courts and temples, new people began to move. Not armies, but families, tribes, whole communities carrying languages and lineages from the misty hills of the Northeast. They did not conquer. They merged. And over time, they changed the genetic story of Bengal forever. But this is just the beginning. Because hidden within that DNA is a deeper story still, one that doesn't just link Bengalis to distant lands, but to ancient enemies. Diseases, famine, climate, natural selection played its role here with terrifying precision. The Bengali genome is not just a record of who came, it's also a record of who survived. Why does this matter? Because the DNA of a people is more than biology. It is narrative. It's the unwritten epic of how a civilization was formed, not from myth, but from migration, struggle, and extraordinary resilience. And in Bengal, that story is unlike anywhere else. Before the first coins were minted, before the Mahabharata echoed through courts, before any map had names for Bengal, people were moving. Not in haste, not in conquest, but in rhythm with the rivers, in search of food, shelter, and survival. And with each footfall on Bengal's fertile soil, a genetic footprint was left behind. The Bengali genome is not a static relic. It is a palimpsest, written over, again and again, by those who arrived before there were borders. It carries in its folds the dust of deserts and the breath of monsoon jungles. And if we listen, we can hear their footsteps in the data. The earliest layer belongs to the indigenous hunter-gatherers, often labeled by modern science as the ancestral South Indians, the ASI. They were here before Sanskrit, before cities, before rice fields. Their genes formed the deep roots beneath everything else, unrecorded in text, but preserved in blood. Then came the great push from the northwest, not a wave, but a tide. The Indo-Aryan migrants, speakers of an early Sanskrit, carriers of the R1a haplogroup, brought with them a new linguistic and cultural layer. But their arrival was not a clean slate. It was a blending, an admixture. The ANI, ancestral North Indians, did not erase what was. They added to it. But even that was just the beginning. Because something unusual happened in Bengal that did not happen in the same way elsewhere in the subcontinent. As millennia passed, new populations arrived not just from the west, but from the east. Austroasiatic tribes, likely related to the modern-day Munda and Santal, came from regions now called Cambodia and Vietnam. Their arrival was not marked by kings or wars, but by the slow, persistent flow of migration. They brought a different language structure, different crops, and their own ancestral signals. Empty name markers like M30 and M4, still found in Bengali women today. And from the Himalayan edge came another wave, the Tibeto-Burman peoples. Their paths traced the hill corridors through present-day Assam and northern Bengal. Their legacy can be seen in the Bengali Y chromosome data, where haplogroups like O2A quietly sit beside the dominant Indo-Aryan lineages. These are not minor footnotes. They are signatures of interweaving. So what emerged from this convergence? Not a melting pot, not a patchwork, but a unique genomic composition that simply does not exist anywhere else in South Asia. The Bengali genome is estimated to be made up of around 50 to 60% South Asian ancestry, with an admixture of 20 to 30% East or Southeast Asian origins. And in some communities, such as those near the northeastern frontiers, that number can go even higher. Genetic research, including large-scale projects like the 1000 Genomes Project, confirms what anthropologists had long suspected. Bengal is not a monolith. Its people carry the legacy of Austroasiatic cultivators, Indo-European herders, and East Asian highlanders, all braided into a singular identity. And yet, there's a paradox, because despite this incredible complexity, the Bengali genetic profile appears remarkably cohesive. There's a tight clustering in PCA analyses, tighter even than in many other Indian ethnicities. How is that possible? Part of the answer lies not in who came, but in how they mixed. Bengal, unlike many other regions, fostered intermarriage, trade-based mobility, and, crucially, fewer caste-based genetic barriers until relatively recent centuries. This created not chaos, but cohesion, a shared genome from diverse origins. And so, the Bengali DNA tells a story that breaks the neat categories drawn by textbook history. It is not defined by myths or modern political borders. It is not confined to one language, one race, one civilization. It is a story of motion, of migration layered over migration, each wave adding nuance, depth, and sometimes contradiction to the identity of a people. It is in this layered inheritance that we find the secret to Bengal's uniqueness, a land shaped not by who ruled it, but by who walked through it. Some secrets don't hide in the shadows. They hide in plain sight, coded in the chromosomes of an entire people. For centuries, the Bengali face has been portrayed through the lens of language, culture, and religion. But science, with its unblinking eye, has revealed something that no myth, no map, no manuscript ever captured. Buried deep within the Bengali genome is a thread pulled not from the Indian subcontinent, but from lands far beyond. This thread, invisible to the naked eye, glows under genomic analysis like an echo from another continent. It speaks the language of East and Southeast Asia. And it is not a whisper. It is a signal. In population studies, when South Asian groups are plotted by genetic clustering, most fall neatly within predictable zones: Punjabi, Tamil, Gujarati, Kashmiri. But Bengalis? They tilt, not toward the west, but subtly and consistently, toward the east. It's as if something in their DNA is reaching across mountains, rivers, and time. What makes this especially remarkable is that no other major Indo-Aryan speaking group shows this kind of East Asian genetic influence. In North India, the East Asian imprint is negligible, almost non-existent. But among Bengalis, particularly those from present-day Bangladesh, it accounts for nearly a tenth of their entire genome. 10% may sound small, but in the language of genetics, it's profound. This East Asian component isn't a modern quirk or a colonial residue. It is ancient and it is precise. Genomic clocks, tools that count mutations over generations, trace this admixture event back approximately 52 generations. That places it in the 6th century CE, when Bengal's political and cultural landscape was undergoing seismic change. The fall of the Gupta Empire had left a power vacuum. Trade routes shifted, forest corridors opened, and people began to move. Not armies this time, but families, speakers of Austroasiatic and Tibeto-Burman tongues, migrating from what we now call Northeast India, Myanmar, and beyond. They didn't arrive with violence. They arrived with kinship, with time. The result? A population that, while linguistically Indo-Aryan, carries within it the genetic legacy of people once thought too far, too foreign, too unrelated. And here lies the twist. This East Asian ancestry is not random or mixed in from modern migrations. It shows up in very specific haplogroups. In Bengali males, Y-DNA haplogroups, such as O, M175, more common in East and Southeast Asia, are found in measurable frequency. Nearly absent in North Indians, but quietly persistent in Bengal. These lineages didn't come yesterday. They came when forests were kingdoms and trade was a way of life. On the maternal side, mitochondrial DNA paints the same picture. Certain subclades, such as M9 and M4A, trace back to East Asian matrilineal roots, a sign that the movement into Bengal included women, not just warrior men. This wasn't a conquest. It was integration. Anthropological studies suggest that these genetic links likely came from Austroasiatic communities, related to groups still living in Southeast Asia today, and Tibeto-Burman tribes who once crossed the same mountains that now divide borders. The East Asian signal is also consistent across social strata, whether in upper caste Hindu Bengali groups, Muslim populations of rural Bangladesh, or non-caste tribal communities along the eastern fringes. The signal remains. It survived conversion, caste, and colonization. And what's more, it's not just ancestry. This East Asian inheritance has left behind more than identity markers. It's connected to traits. Genes that affect immune response, metabolism, and disease resistance also carry subtle East Asian signatures, hinting that this admixture didn't just change who the Bengalis were. It influenced how their bodies work. In the end, this thread in the sequence isn't a footnote. It's a defining stroke. It reveals that the Bengali genome is not a closed story, but a crossroads, where South meets East, not by accident, but by deep historical gravity. And in that meeting, something rare emerged. A people who look west, but carry the memory of the East in their bones. The Ganges Delta has long been fertile, not just for rice and rain, but for death. Here, across the centuries, an invisible war has raged, not between kings, not between nations, but between a microscopic killer and the human body. And it is in this forgotten war that the Bengali genome became a masterpiece of evolutionary adaptation. The enemy was merciless, Vibrio cholerae, a bacterium as ancient as the rivers themselves. For generations, it haunted Bengal's waters, spreading through floods and wells, thriving in warmth, silence, and ignorance. But while cholera came again and again, it didn't just kill, it shaped. Natural selection doesn't announce itself. It whispers. It prunes. And in Bengal, it left its mark not through scars on the skin, but through changes in blood. Globally, blood type O is one of the most common, a near-universal constant in human populations. But in Bengal, it's vanishingly rare. Among the 8 billion people alive today, nowhere is blood group O less frequent than in this region. Why? Because those with O-type blood suffer the most in cholera epidemics. Study after study confirms it. Type O individuals are at significantly higher risk of severe dehydration and death from cholera infection. And over time, in the floodplains of Bengal, this vulnerability became fatal. The human body fought back, not consciously, but genetically. Individuals with A or B blood types, especially type B, had a survival edge. Generation by generation, those with O-type genes were selected against. Their lineage dwindled, not through prejudice or politics, but through the relentless arithmetic of survival. Today, that legacy remains encoded in Bengali blood. The ABO distribution here is unlike anywhere else. Type B dominates, not by chance, but by consequence. But the battle didn't end there. Scientists studying rural Bengali communities have uncovered more than just blood-type shifts. They've found entire segments of the genome that appear to have been sculpted by cholera exposure. Over 300 regions in the Bengali genome bear the fingerprints of recent positive selection, most of them tied to immune response and intestinal resilience. Among these, several genes stand out, those regulating fluid secretion in the gut, potassium ion transport, and inflammatory signaling pathways like NF-kappa B. Together, they form a kind of molecular shield, one fine-tuned over centuries of exposure to a single, devastating bacterium. This isn't just theory. These gene variants have measurable effects. Individuals carrying certain alleles show increased resistance to severe cholera symptoms, shorter illness, less fluid loss, greater survival. In effect, the Bengali genome has become a quiet archive of a microbial siege that lasted more than 1,000 years. And while cities rose and fell, while languages shifted and empires passed, this battle went unnoticed by chroniclers. But evolution remembered. There's a haunting irony here. The same rivers that nourished Bengal also harbored the bacteria that tested its people generation after generation. And in that crucible of disease, the Bengali body became something singular, something hardened not by sword, but by sickness. This chapter of the genome tells us that identity isn't always about where we come from. Sometimes, it's about what we've had to survive. Cholera didn't just kill in Bengal. It carved. Not all battles are loud. Some are whispered inside the body, fought in the quiet mutation of a single gene. In Bengal, long before antibiotics or vaccines, another parasite haunted the air, Plasmodium falciparum, the deadliest strain of malaria. It didn't invade with fanfare. It arrived on wings. In the monsoon dusk, it made no distinctions, child or elder, farmer or scholar. But the body, over centuries, responded with a desperate compromise. A mutation, a trait. Enter hemoglobin E. In the genetic map of South Asia, hemoglobin E is an outlier, a variant seen frequently in Southeast Asia, but rarely across most of India. Yet in Bengal, it exists in unusual density, and that density tells a story, not of chance, but of adaptation. This mutation alters the structure of hemoglobin, the protein that carries oxygen through our blood. In its heterozygous form, when inherited from only one parent, hemoglobin E can reduce the ability of malaria parasites to replicate inside red blood cells. It weakens the enemy, just enough to survive. In evolutionary terms, that made it precious. Natural selection favored the carriers. They didn't die of cerebral malaria as easily. They lived. They reproduced. And the gene spread, silently, across generations, especially in the lowland regions of eastern Bengal, where mosquito-borne infections were a seasonal reality for thousands of years. But evolution is rarely kind, because when that same mutation is inherited from both parents, the result is not protection, but pathology. The child born with 2 copies of the hemoglobin E gene often faces a life of pain, anemia, and in many cases, a condition called E/beta thalassemia. It's a cruel twist. The very mutation that helped ancestors survive now threatens the next generation. This is the gamble nature made in Bengal. It's a pattern mirrored elsewhere in the malaria belt, in West Africa with sickle cell trait, in the Mediterranean with beta thalassemia. But hemoglobin E belongs distinctly to the East, and its presence in Bengal draws a genetic line connecting it to Myanmar, Thailand, and Cambodia, a corridor of shared survival strategy, written not in alliances or treaties, but in hemoglobin. Today, roughly 3 to 7% of Bangladeshis carry hemoglobin E. In some ethnic clusters, particularly near the eastern borderlands, that number can exceed 30%. These aren't small figures. They represent a fundamental shift in how the Bengali genome adapted to its environment. But this adaptation came at a cost. Modern Bangladesh faces one of the highest rates of inherited blood disorders in the region. Hospitals treat thousands of children with transfusion-dependent thalassemia, a legacy not of weakness, but of an old evolutionary deal now catching up to the present. What began as a life-saving mutation is now a double-edged sword. And yet, within that paradox lies one of the most human truths. Survival isn't always clean. Sometimes it means accepting imperfection in order to continue. Sometimes the price of resilience is written in suffering. The hemoglobin E story isn't just a medical detail. It's a testament to what the Bengali body has endured, to how the land, the parasite, and the gene dance together for centuries, each one shaping the other, locked in a silent, invisible war no textbook ever mentions. Long before temples were carved or kingdoms etched onto copper plates, a quieter civilization existed, one without manuscripts, without monuments, but not without legacy. Its legacy is genetic. In the story of Bengali identity, much has been written about empires, migrations, and languages. But beneath that visible narrative lies an older one, carried by the indigenous and tribal communities whose footprints still echo beneath Bengal's modern cities. They are the uncredited architects of the Bengali genome. The ancient Austroasiatic tribes, including the Santal and Munda, were among the earliest inhabitants of eastern South Asia. They spoke languages unrelated to Sanskrit, worshipped spirits older than gods, and lived in tune with forest cycles. But their real inheritance wasn't their myths. It was their DNA. Modern genomic studies reveal that these early groups contributed significantly to the foundation of Bengali ancestry. Certain mitochondrial haplogroups, such as M30 and M4, still persist in Bengali maternal lines, suggesting that women from these tribal communities became part of the general population long before recorded history began. These weren't isolated pockets. They were interwoven threads. And then came another set of silent contributors, the Tibeto-Burman speaking peoples from the northern and northeastern frontiers. Communities like the Rajbangshi, living along the foothills and floodplains, brought with them unique Y chromosome signatures, such as haplogroup O2A, a marker typically associated with populations from Southeast Asia and the Himalayan arc. This dual inheritance, Austroasiatic from the south and Tibeto-Burman from the northeast, created an underlying layer in the Bengali genetic structure that still separates it from much of northern and western India. But these contributions go beyond DNA. They appear in the Bengali gut microbiome. Yes, even the bacteria in the digestive system tells this story. When compared with indigenous groups from the Chittagong Hill tracts, Bengalis show a distinct microbial composition, not entirely like their tribal neighbors, but not identical to Indo-Aryan populations either. It's an in-between zone, a microbial echo of past genetic blending. What this means is that even the bacteria living inside modern Bengalis carry the memory of ancient tribal ancestries, a biological palimpsest layered over time, showing how closely evolution intertwines with history. And yet, socially, these communities were often marginalized, forgotten, or rewritten as footnotes. Their presence in school books may be limited, but their presence in bloodlines is irrefutable. In modern demographic studies, even as genetic homogeneity among Bengalis is noted, researchers point to these very indigenous markers as defining features of what makes the group genetically distinct from other South Asians. Not dominant but essential, not loud but foundational. So when we ask what makes Bengali DNA unique, the answer isn't only an outside admixture, not just in invasions or migrations from distant lands. It's also in those who were always here, who never crossed borders, because they lived before borders. They are not gone. They are embedded. Every breath drawn on Bengal soil carries a trace of them. Every genome sequence today reveals the shadows of their genes, still alive, still humming in the bloodstream of a people who walk modern streets, but carry ancient forests in their cells. In the vast, complex social lattice of South Asia, caste has long acted like a boundary, invisible yet deeply consequential. For centuries, it shaped marriages, occupations, movement, and even faith. And often, it left a clear imprint in the DNA. But Bengal tells a different story. Unlike many regions of India where caste lines fossilized over generations, Bengal appears to have resisted that rigidity. Not entirely, but enough to leave a genetic anomaly, one that defies the expected. Population-wide studies reveal something rare, an unexpected genetic uniformity among Bengalis, regardless of caste or class. Whether one samples a Brahmin from West Bengal, a Muslim farmer from Sylhet, or a Kayastha from Dhaka, the underlying genetic structure remains surprisingly cohesive. It's not that caste didn't exist. It did in law, in practice, in tradition. but its biological legacy is far less entrenched than elsewhere on the subcontinent. In Uttar Pradesh, for example, upper and lower caste groups can show clear genetic separation even today. In Bengal, that separation begins to blur. What explains this? History, once again, is the key. Bengal's caste system, while present, emerged later and less rigidly than in the Indo-Gangetic core. The region's dense agrarian economy, maritime trade networks, and syncretic religious movements all contributed to a more permeable social fabric. The Bhakti poets, the Sufi mystics, the Baul singers, they didn't just question caste. They often ignored it altogether. That cultural elasticity translated into biological openness. Marriage restrictions were looser. Social mobility, while not universal, was more achievable. And during periods of upheaval, famines, colonial shifts, partition migrations, the mixing intensified. Waves of movement from both east and west flooded the region with new unions, new communities, and with them, new genomes. Even religious identity did not create strong genetic partitions. Muslim and Hindu Bengalis share overwhelmingly similar genetic profiles, something not universally true elsewhere in India. The lines of faith may have drawn divisions above the surface, but beneath it, the blood told a different story. This genetic cohesion has another implication: widespread distribution of key traits. Whether we look at immune system variants, disease susceptibilities, or ancestral haplogroups, we find them not siloed within castes or regions, but shared broadly across the population. That makes Bengalis both unique and incredibly valuable for genetic research. In a land where social categories once held power, the genome offers a quiet rebellion, an egalitarian undercurrent flowing beneath historical hierarchies. There's something profound here. In a world still battling with inherited divisions, Bengal offers a genetic glimpse of what happens when those divisions soften, not entirely disappear, but evolve. And the result is not confusion, but coherence. Not chaos, but convergence. The Bengali genome, in this light, becomes more than a map of ancestry. It becomes a reminder that identity can survive diversity, that unity doesn't require uniformity, and that biology often moves faster than tradition. Imagine a grand genetic map, a mosaic of populations stretching from the Mediterranean to the South China Sea. On this map, every group clusters in familiar patterns. But then there's Bengal, a signature that doesn't quite follow the rules. Close, but not quite aligned. Familiar, yet undeniably distinct. The Bengali genome, at first glance, seems to echo its neighbors: North Indians to the west, Assamese to the northeast, Nepalis to the north. But upon deeper analysis, it veers, and in that veering lies its identity. Take the Gangetic populations, communities in Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and northern India. They share the foundational South Asian ancestry components. ANI from the northwest, ASI from deep prehistory. Their genetic makeup is steeped in Indo-Aryan legacy. But what they lack is what Bengalis possess: a traceable, quantifiable infusion of East Asian DNA. In side-by-side genetic comparisons, this distinction becomes stark. Bengalis consistently carry around 5 to 15% East or Southeast Asian ancestry, absent in their Western neighbors. It's not just ancestry. It's alleles. It's haplogroups. It's adaptation. To the northeast, in Assam and neighboring hill states, the shift intensifies. The Assamese, particularly non-tribal Indo-Aryan groups, show a profile overlapping with Bengalis, but just slightly more eastern. The difference is gradient, not wall. As one moves eastward, the East Asian component increases. Bengali DNA sits precisely on this transitional slope, embodying both convergence and divergence. Then come the Nepali populations, a split duality. High-caste Indo-Aryan groups closely resemble North Indians, but the Tibeto-Burman peoples of the hills, Sherpa, Tamang, Magar, show dominant East Asian markers. Bengalis, once again, fall in between. They carry the Eastern influence, without fully becoming it. A balanced admixture. Not mountain-adapted, but delta-born. Further east, the Burmese people stand almost entirely on the other end of the spectrum. Their DNA clusters tightly with Southeast Asians, genetically closer to Han Chinese than to any South Asian group. The Bengali and Burmese gene pools may touch at the borders, but their cores are separated by thousands of years of migration and evolution. And yet, when scientists trace the specific East Asian segments in Bengali genomes, they find something curious. Those segments resemble not modern Burmese, but Tibeto-Burman groups farther north, perhaps suggesting that the original gene flow into Bengal came from upland migration corridors, not coastal ones. In the end, this comparative analysis doesn't isolate Bengalis. It contextualizes them. It shows that their uniqueness is not a genetic island, it's a crossroads, a meeting point, a gradient zone where the deep subcontinental past meets the eastern frontier. Genes don't evolve in a vacuum. They respond. They adapt. And in Bengal, the environment has been more than just a backdrop. It's been a relentless force shaping the genome across millennia. One of the most urgent examples lies beneath the surface, in the water. Bangladesh suffers from one of the world's worst groundwater arsenic contaminations. Millions rely on tube wells, many of which pull water tainted with arsenic from the earth. Chronic exposure causes cancer, organ damage, and generational health effects. But researchers studying affected communities noticed something strange. Not everyone reacts the same. Some people, despite high exposure, show better arsenic tolerance. And the answer, it turns out, may be genetic. Genome-wide studies have identified variants in genes like AS3MT and FTCD that influence arsenic metabolism. These variants don't eliminate the risk, but they improve detoxification efficiency, hinting at a possible ongoing evolutionary response to a uniquely local crisis. Bengal's DNA, it seems, is adjusting, silently, slowly, to poison. And that's not the only environmental adaptation. Lactose intolerance remains high among Bengalis, a marker of their ancient reliance on plant-based diets and fish, rather than pastoral dairy cultures. It's not a deficiency. It's an ancestral imprint. The Bengali body was never built for cow's milk. It was built for rice paddies, lentils, and river catch. Then there's the issue of disease risk. Like other South Asians, Bengalis show higher genetic predispositions to conditions like type 2 diabetes, coronary artery disease, and metabolic syndrome. But their risk profiles differ subtly, possibly due to admixture patterns and historical dietary adaptations. Genes linked to insulin resistance may have once helped conserve energy during frequent famines. Today, in urban diets, they backfire. Even the immune system tells the story. Studies on killer cell receptor diversity, genes that govern how our bodies fight pathogens, show remarkable polymorphism in Bengali populations. Diversity here means resilience, a genome that has been shaped not only by who arrived, but by what tried to kill them. In short, Bengal's environment didn't just test the people, it sculpted their very code. History books speak of kings and battles, but genomes carry what books forget. The breath of women left out of lineages, the movement of nameless traders, the terror of unseen pandemics. In Bengal, that hidden archive is exceptionally rich. Every layer of genetic data points to an unbroken conversation with history. The ANIESI divide echoes the arrival of Indo-European languages. The East Asian signatures mark a time when trade flourished along riverine corridors. Turkic and Persian influences whisper through rare Y-chromosome lineages, leftovers from medieval courts and caravanserais. Even the presence of ancient maternal haplogroups speaks of migration not by armies, but by matriarchs. Women who moved through marriage, famine, or pilgrimage, carrying mitochondrial lineages that still exist, unchanged in modern Bengalis. The genome shows influence from Central Asian clans, Southeast Asian traders, and indigenous hill tribes. And it records what textbooks do not, that Bengal's identity was never singular. It was layered, polyphonic, syncretic. When one compares ancient DNA samples across South Asia, Bengal repeatedly shows overlap with distant populations, the Mongoloid ridge tribes, the Iranian plateau, even the Near Eastern mitochondrial trees, not in dominant waves, but in quiet strands, woven into the broader pattern. This genetic richness isn't accidental. It is the byproduct of a geography that encouraged contact, a river delta that connected mountains to sea, a linguistic openness that absorbed more than it expelled. In Bengal, history is not just remembered, it is inherited. We've journeyed through centuries, not by ship or map, but by genome. We've seen how migration, survival, climate, caste, and convergence have shaped the Bengali body into something truly rare. Now we turn to you. What part of this journey surprised you the most? Was it the East Asian fingerprint buried in blood? The war against cholera written in the immune system? The ancient voices carried by tribal genes, still whispering today? Tell us in the comments what part of Bengal's genetic story shook your understanding. And if you believe this kind of storytelling, rooted in science, driven by history, deserves a bigger audience, share this video, hit that like button, and help us bring hidden histories into the light.